So in this video, we're going to continue working with the texture, photographic texture we started with here. And we've made already a albedo diffuse texture, a metalness texture. Now we're going to make a roughness texture. And to do that, I will start with a duplicate of my original texture surface and put it into, let's make a new group. And this time, instead of simply making a new group, let's make a new group from the layers that are selected. So this will automatically be placed into it. And we'll call this roughness. And then I'm going to call this roughness texture. And in fact, I should have labeled this metalness texture. There we go. And so for my roughness texture, I want pixels to be lighter if they are more rough, which is less polished, and I want them to be darker if they are more polished. So in the case of this surface, we've discussed it in terms of it being either a metal plate that has some rust and some scratches on it, or possibly being also used as a painted kind of cracked wood surface. So I'm going to make two roughness textures. I'm going to make one more for a metal plate version and one for a wood version. I'm going to first make, let's duplicate this. Let's call this roughness texture metal. There we go. For the metal version, I'm going to desaturate. So under Image, Adjustments, Desaturate, I want to take out any color tones and focus just on lights to darks in the image. And if I want for metal, let's see, dark is polished. So nothing should be really black. In this case, this is a metal surface that is rusted, that is a bit worn. So I don't want, and this is a subjective assertion on my part, I don't want for my material any pixels to be black or not rough at all. I want everything to be somewhere in the range of rough. And the most rough that I want is where my black pixels are, in the rusted, cracked areas. I want it to be absolutely rough and not going to be able to see any reflection in there whatsoever. And then in my lighter areas, I want it to be somewhat rough, but certainly not polished, but not nearly as rough as in the rust. So I think what I should do first is under Image Adjustments, I'm going to invert this. And now the very most roughness is happening in my rusted, cracked areas. And in the areas that are not cracked, I have some, maybe half roughness, something along those lines. And what I really don't like in this case is some of my top surface is very dark in the lower right-hand corner and very bright in the upper left-hand corner. So I'm going to try to mitigate that and raise the dark area up to this mid-tone area. And I'm going to use not the levels that we've been looking at so far, but my curves. And my curves tool has a dark point that I could raise, a black point that I could raise up to white, or I could, let's say, bring closer into the image to force more of my image to be in the black zone. And I have a white point that I could bring down to black, or I could compress kind of like levels to make sure that to compress more of my image to the white point. However, with curves, I can also click in the middle and drag out a point. In fact, I could have a few points. So what I want to do is I want to take this darker tone down here, which is somewhere in this area, and lift it up so it's a little higher. But I want to keep my brighter grays in the range that they are. So I'm actually going to add a few more points here. Not too many. I'm going to try to isolate and raise. And I'm looking in this area as I'm moving these points up and bringing them a little bit closer to, up towards the white top of the graph here. There, I'm quite pleased with that. I've for the most part gotten rid of the darker tone here and made it more consistent with the tone elsewhere. So now let's look at the roughness texture not for a metal. I'm going to desaturate. And again, I'm going to invert. And in fact, I'm going to start with a duplicate of this material, this texture, because I already had done that heavy lifting work of balancing the tones. And in the case of something that is not metal, I want the not cracked surface to be closer to rough. I want it to be not very reflective at all. So I'm going to bring up my grays closer to my whites. I'm going to use my levels command for that, and I'm going to take, say, this would be totally not rough, and this means that my areas that were more of a middle gray are now very much a lighter gray, very, very rough. So the cracks will still be absolutely rough, but my upper surface is going to be even more kind of rough and more, think of it as less polished, less reflective, almost not reflective at all. And so now I have two versions of my roughness that I can use depending on whether I want this to be a little bit in the mid-range of roughness or polished, or absolutely not rough and quite diffuse in its reflectivity. In the next video, we're going to make a normal map that will help create the illusion of surface details and bumpiness in our texture material. And then we'll move on to loading these into an example game engine to see how we can build a final material with these textures.